A couple of weeks ago we went off-roading. We didn't mean to, it was by accident. You know, if you go off-roading, it's usually in a big truck out in the forest or in the desert or something like that. Instead, we went off-roading in our tiny Honda hatchback in the middle of a snowstorm in downtown Ottawa. I told you it was accidental. We were headed downtown to help out with an event, and we were trying to find our way into a parking lot nearby. The snow had been falling all day and the streets hadn't been plowed very well yet, and we saw tire tracks leading into the parking lot. Now, I was suspicious. It wasn't really clear whether or not this was an entrance, but it was tough to see underneath all the snow. So in our puddle jumper of a car, we figured we would risk it. And we discovered as we hit the curb and bounced up and over it that we had accidentally gone off-roading. Oops. Too late now. Fortunately, our little buggy made it over the hump and we were safely into the parking lot. And I parked the car and I got out to go over to the pay machine to get my parking slip. And as I was approaching the machine, there was a woman coming the other way. And she asked if I was going to pay for a parking slip. And I said yes, wondering why she was asking. As it turned out, she was on her way out of the lot and she had paid for a pass that wasn't going to expire until the next day. And she offered it to us. Cool, free parking. I mean, it didn't make my week or anything, but it was an unexpected bonus. So I tell you this to illustrate the connection between grace and humility. We were shown grace and we ended up with free parking. But if I changed some of the details, it would have been a different story. If we had blown into that parking lot in a gold-plated Escalade with a loud look-at-me muffler blaring, and we took up 3 spots to ensure that no one parked close to us, and if I had gotten out of the SUV with a perfect coif of hair and diamond rings on every finger and a full-length fur coat, or if I had been snooty with the woman as we crossed paths, do you think she would have extended grace to us? Probably not. It's tough to extend grace to the proud, isn't it? People have a hard time being patient with someone like Kanye West or Terrell Owens or Donald Trump. When they say something stupid or completely out of touch with reality, we have a hard time forgiving them or feeling sorry for them, because we all know how highly they think of themselves. They deserve to be taken down a few pegs. At least that's what we think. It's really tough to show grace to someone who is not humble. And some say that even God won't extend grace to the proud. In Luke chapter 14, there's a story about a dinner party that Jesus was invited to. Jesus is recorded as having gone to various dinner parties during his ministry. We often think of the ones where he showed up and ate with the sinners and the lowlives and the scum of society and was criticized for it. But in this case, he's invited to the home of a prominent religious leader of the day. Cool. For once, Jesus is going to avoid ruffling feathers and have a civilized meal with the influential people that he should be associating with. Except that's not what Jesus tends to do. You know there's something up. There's a whole group of religious leaders there watching him, and it's like they're stalking him, waiting for any wrong moves that they can pounce and denounce, which is kind of their MO. And Jesus knows this, and he decides to go on the offensive, in both senses of the word. Starting in verse 7, it says this: When Jesus noticed that all who had come to the dinner were trying to sit in the seats of honor near the head of the table, he gave them this advice. When you are invited to a wedding feast, don't sit in the seat of honor. What if someone who is more distinguished than you has also been invited? The host will come and say, "Give this person your seat." Then you will be embarrassed, and you will have to take whatever seat is left at the foot of the table. Instead, take the lowest place at the foot of the table. Then when your host sees you, he will come and say, "Friend, we have a better place for you." And then you will be honored in front of all the other guests. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. This is a great passage to break out whenever you are planning the seating arrangement at a wedding or some other fancy shindig. Just put all the most important people at the back and tell them, the Bible said so. But is Jesus really talking about seating plans? Not really. He's talking about our demeanor towards other people. He's talking about the assumptions that we make about our place in society, about our rank, about what we feel we deserve. Respect me in my place, or my money, or my accomplishments, and treat me appropriately. He puts it into terms that religious leaders can grasp, the potential loss of status, the embarrassment that they could experience by thinking too highly of themselves. The key statement is verse 11. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. It's another soundbite from one of Jesus' favorite themes. Last shall be first, the greatest is the least, and here the exalted will be humbled, and the humbled will be exalted. And it's a soundbite that should echo in our heads every day during the week. Like maybe at the grocery store, or at work, or maybe during heavy traffic. Yeah, heavy traffic. Have you ever noticed that the fancy cars rarely seem to have signal lights that work? It's weird. And maybe there's something wrong with all their mirrors because they seem to just swing in front of you like they own the road. But there's this weird thing that happens sometimes, especially around really expensive cars. There's this thing that happens when a rust bucket of a car is nearby. If you're driving the world's most beaten up car, full of rust holes, no muffler, you know the type, suddenly cars around you give you a much wider berth. Maybe it's because they know you don't have much to lose, or maybe it's because they're not sure if your brakes are going to give out at any given time. But whatever it is, suddenly the exalted are humbled, and the humble is exalted. The glossy, expensive cars give way to the junker that shouldn't even be on the road. So next time a big expensive car cuts you off, just remember this, and instead of shouting those choice words that popped into your head, try this instead. Let them in very graciously, and with a smile on your face, yell at the top of your lungs, "For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." If they hear you, great. They will either be chagrined and reconsider how they are acting, or they'll be totally confused, and that can be nearly as satisfying. But back in the passage, Jesus continues, and he's addressing his host. When you put on a luncheon or a banquet, he said, don't invite your friends, brothers, relatives, and rich neighbors, for they will invite you back, and that will be your only reward. Instead, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Then, at the resurrection of the righteous, God will reward you for inviting those who could not repay you. This is what grace is all about, doing something for someone when you know they can't repay you. And you have to consider the context of this story. Jesus was talking to a person with significant power and influence. He was telling him to do something bigger than exchanging meals with the people that are only in his sphere. He was telling him to use his place and his power to serve instead of to rule, to give of himself without calculating how it might benefit him. Serve these people that right now you essentially have no connection with, these people that you avoid, these people who cannot pay you back. Uncle Ben was right. With great power comes great responsibility. Use your status, your means, to elevate others, not to elevate yourself. Those people who you think you are above, those are probably the people you should be serving first. Think of others more highly than you think of yourself. And some even go further and say that true humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it's not thinking of yourself at all. And know that you're not going to be rewarded. Well, actually, that's not what Jesus says. He says, if you just hang out with your friends and trade dinners back and forth, then that's all the reward you can get for that. You're actually cutting yourself off from greater rewards that could be yours, if you would use your power and your influence to serve others. Many of us don't think of ourselves as powerful or as having much stature, but open your eyes and look around and you will see those that are beneath you, the people you avoid, the outcast, the poor, the sick, people at work, on the bus, in your neighborhood. Consider how you can use what you've got, what's been given to you, to elevate others instead of elevating yourself. Here's a few follow-up questions. One of the original Pivot 613 documents lists walking humbly as a value for this church and those who are part of it. It says, we will strive to remember our place in this world and in God's kingdom. We will consider others better than ourselves and will serve others gladly regardless of their social or cultural position. Does that accurately capture what Jesus is talking about here? What does it mean in practical terms for our church? We sometimes confuse humility with humiliation. What is the difference between these two? Does one lead to the other? Did Jesus experience humiliation as a result of his humility? It can be really easy to fake humility. Is false humility worse than no humility? Or is there value to faking it in the hopes that by doing so, someday you might sincerely feel it? Is there a good way to learn to be humble? Is it a problem that Jesus dangles the carrot of there being a reward for humility? Does that make the act of showing humility somehow less pure? And finally, for you, what are the modern, everyday equivalents to sitting in the seats of honor at the banquet? What would Jesus suggest as your alternative?